Hello, my name is Thomas Morris, and today I'm going to be talking to you about research I conducted with Dr. Michael Chen at Eastern Kentucky University on voice's effect on effort and recall, the role of cognitive stress. Computer-generated speech is becoming more commonplace in daily life, including in the classroom. Due to this increased abundance, it is important to examine the impact of computer voice on students' cognitive effort and recall performance. In a previous study by Craig and Schroeder, they found that the human voice and the modern machine synthesized voice perform similarly as a teaching agent when audio information is paired with video information, and that both of these voices perform better than the classic synthesized voice. The main questions that we hoped to answer were: how does machine synthesized voice affect cognitive effort? And when placed under cognitive stress, how will participants perform in recall related tasks? 122 participants were tasked with listening to a three-part audio lecture on airplane flight, with each part of the lecture presented by a different voice condition. One of the voices was a classic synthesized voice.
The airplane is one of the most significant achievements of modern science.
Another was a modern synthesized voice.
The airplane is one of the most significant achievements of modern science.
And the last was a human voice.
The airplane is one of the most significant achievements of modern science.
The first part of the study's procedure included training and acquainting participants with the procedure and format of the study. And after completing a sample lecture to get acquainted with the study's format, participants would be presented with a 5-digit number to memorize for 15 seconds. Participants would then listen to a segment of the audio lecture. After listening to the lecture segment, participants would try to recall the 5-digit number that they were previously shown. This memorize and recall a 5-digit number task was designed to place participants under cognitive stress. Participants would then rate the amount of effort this task took on the NASA TLX and answer recall questions about the segment of the audio lecture they had just listened to. This procedure was repeated 3 times for each section of the lecture being presented by a different voice. When examining participants' cognitive effort ratings, we found that the classic synthesized voice was seen as the most effortful, followed by the modern computer synthesized voice, with the human voice being rated as the least effortful voice condition. This was the expected result and was consistent with a hypothesis that was formed on a past research study that we did, which showed that when participants were not placed under any cognitive stress, they viewed the human voice as a better instructor. But in that study, participants surprisingly did better in recall performance questions presented by, as rated in this study, the more effortful classic synthesized voice condition. So when we first take a look at the combined recall, we see that participants did the best in the human voice condition, followed by the modern synthesized voice condition, and they did the worst in the classic voice condition. And so in free recall, which are open response type questions, participants did better in the human voice condition, and then they did equally bad in both of the synthesized voice conditions. And so now when we look at cued recall, we can see that participants' recall performance was the worst in the classic voice condition, but they were similar in both the human and the modern synthesized voice condition. This result specifically was consistent with what was found in a study by Craig and Schroeder that included visual information along with the audio lecture information. This study shows that the human voice requires the least cognitive effort and best promotes learning when participants are placed under cognitive stress. We believe this result was due to the overtaxing of participants' cognitive resources in the synthesized voice condition. In a previous study we conducted, we found that when participants are not placed under any cognitive stress, they had the best recall performance in the classic voice condition. That previous study also examined how participants rated each voice's instructor persona and found that participants found the human voice to be the most engaging and instructor-like, which we hypothesized was due to it being the least effortful voice condition. This study confirms that participants view the human voice as the least effortful over both synthesized voices in the absence of any visual information. When participants were placed under cognitive stress, the synthesized voices led to worse recall performance overall. But when looking at the less effortful cued recall performance, we can see that the human voice and the modern synthesized voice both perform similarly. This study shows that when presenting information that requires effortful cognitive processing, it is best to use a human voice when visual information will not be included. An example of this type of situation would be when deciding what type of voice to use when making an audiobook. Thank you so much for attending my poster session. If you have any questions or feedback, please feel free to reach out to me.